that from a science standpoint and a technology demonstration standpoint in preparation for that human campaign. And then we've got a topic on a small lunar servicing and maintenance robot for helping out with things like inspection and fluid transfers, any sort of operations that could offload the need for human intervention and time, because the human time on the surface is going to be at a premium. So the more that we can automate and utilize robotic services, the better in terms of the number of crew that we have there. Chris, is there anything you wanted to add there?
No, just maybe as a little bit of a big picture thing. First of all, obviously, glad to have everybody dialed in here and looking forward to all of the proposals coming in from y'all in a few months here. With these themes, I think we're hopefully giving you the opportunity to go from the scale of an individual system design there in the robot for the small servicing theme all the way up to some pretty big picture architectural considerations for the sustained lunar evolution, and letting you pick whether you'd rather play on the moon or on Mars for this year. So again, glad to see everybody back who's done this before, and for everybody who's doing this for the first time, welcome, and looking forward to seeing your great ideas here.
All right, thanks, Chris. Yeah, I kind of jumped over the hello, how are you? Welcome. So appreciate that. Right.
All good?
Yep.
All right, well, welcome everybody we're going to now begin the technical questions. I'll read off the questions on the slide, and Dan or Chris are going to read off the answer or provide a little bit more response, depending on if it's needed. So we can go ahead and get started with the next slide, Jen. The Sustained Lunar Evolution and Inspirational Moment theme. Question number 3 on your Q&A summary session summary document, if you're following along. What is meant by long duration with respect to the amount of time a given crew will spend on the moon? What about increased population? What is the specific timeline for long-term sustainability? Do we define these terms, or does the competition?
Right, so in this phase, because the crew will rotate while staying longer than the initial 33 days that we have in the foundational exploration period of time, you can assume durations of up to 1 year. The team should define the timeline and the scope for increasing the population beyond the 4 crew that we're looking at in terms of the foundational engineering, and how you would sustain that as a function of your architecture's ability to meet the increasing demands. It's kind of the sustained lunar evolution is really kind of an open canvas, but we're kind of looking for what is that transition between 4 crew, 33 days on the surface, to how do you translate that into a sustained presence where you've got crew members, individuals there on the surface of the moon in a permanent fashion on a rotating basis.
All right, next slide is, what does NASA pay per ton for propellant, particularly liquid hydrogen, liquid methane, and liquid oxygen?
Tori, I think you skipped a question.
Yeah,
we're on number 8.
Oh, are we designing for SLE or the interim stage between FE and SLE? Can you be a little more explicit about crew size, crew schedule, rotation schedule, and cost considerations?
Yeah, so I kind of covered that a little bit in the previous question, but this is the interim stage between foundational exploration and sustained lunar exploration, with an initial operating capability in the 2040 timeframe. So you have some room to decide what is appropriate for this transition and justify your assumptions. So there's discussions in the architectural, the ADD, the architecture definition document, and the other NASA references that we have to take a look at.
Thank you, Dan. Next question is, what does NASA pay per ton for propellant, particularly liquid hydrogen, liquid methane, and liquid oxygen?
Yeah, so we really like the teams to look at it from the other angle, is how much you would need to charge for propellant on the lunar surface and possibly elsewhere in orbit that's launched back to orbit, for your system to pay for itself. So we want to look at pricing to be from a business model standpoint, not necessarily what NASA would quote unquote pay for that commodity, those commodities, and also to be able to support private industry activities as we enter into this SLE period.
Next question. Is the lunar base's independence to be self-sustainable without Earth's help more important, or are we looking at it from a cost basis in cases where it may be cheaper to get materials or machines from Earth?
So again, the goal here is to become more self-sufficient on the moon, and understand what it takes to do that. So it's expected that we'll have some things that are brought, that are imported from Earth. So for example, things that require a large industrial base to manufacture. The team should decide what goods can economically be made on the moon with their systems in their architecture, in their approach, and then what needs to be brought from the Earth, with this idea of reducing the dependency on the Earth resources over time.
All right, and our next question, this one was swapped with the next question. So if you're following along in the Q&A session summary document and you haven't refreshed, you may want to. What is meant by and an existing demand for regolith extraction, metal production, and propellant production in the order of tens to thousands of kilograms per year each? Is there a minimum amount we need to provide for each? Do we need to provide equal amounts of each? Is our extracted regolith meant to feed into the metal and propellant production? Or do we need a surplus of regolith separate from the metal and propellant production? Are there existing demands for anything else we need to address?
Okay, so you can read the answer there, but I'll lead off by saying that this is an area that's pretty open. But for clarity, we're updating because we had a little bit of uncertainty or lack of clarity in the description. So we're updating the guidelines to read that teams may assume the availability of at least 100 kilowatts of electric power. That hasn't changed. And an existing yearly demand for regolith extraction, metal production, and propellant production varying between 10,000 and 100,000 kilograms each. So 10 tons, between 10 tons and 100 tons. Now, there are no firm numbers again at this point. It is assumed that those production rates will increase over time. So there's no minimum that you need to provide, and equal amounts of each are not necessary. Regolith extraction needs will be significantly greater than the actual ISRU products. So we're just kind of capturing the order of magnitude here. And if you think about it, or if you look at some of the studies, we probably need on the order of 10 tons to assist with crew ascent off the surface of the moon, depending on the rocket system that's used, the lander system that's used. And if we start talking about providing propellant with lunar resources, you're talking on the order of about 100 tons or more. So those are kind of the yearly rates. And again, it's not firm. How your concept interfaces with that demand is up to you. You're free to identify additional ISRU products. So you can kind of think of it both ways. There could be a demand for example, lunar ascent, for Mars missions as we progress into SLE. But if there are markets that are in need of excess of that capacity, how would your architecture, your elements support both that demand and any excess? So hopefully that's clear.
Thanks, Dan. And before we move on, just as a clarification, this update is not a change to the theme. It's just a clarification of what was already there, right?
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Thank
Sorry
you.
if I misspoke there. It's not a change, but we're changing the wording in the guideline to make it clear.
Thank you. All right, and the last question in this theme, what are NASA's expectations for ISRU production rate capabilities of the base by 2040?
Yeah, and again, so I covered it before. We just wanted to separate them in these two questions, but that yearly demand is on the order of 10 metric tons to 100 metric tons, 10,000 kilograms, and 100,000 kilograms. And then as you get to, a sustained industrial capability, you're talking about something on the order of 100,000 kilograms or more as we move forward. So again, it's assumed that these production rates will increase over time.
And that ends the questions for the Sustained Lunar Evolution and Inspirational Moment theme. We'll be moving on to questions from advanced science missions and technology demonstrators for Human Mars Precursor Campaign. And our first question in this category is question number 1. Can you describe more in depth what the steering committee at RASC-AL is looking for in this theme?
Yeah, I'll take over for answering some questions here, Tori. So we're looking for innovative and implementable ideas, whether they're enabling or addressing science considerations that NASA's interested in, or technology demonstrations that can help set the table for future missions there. Part of what motivates this theme is that we're expecting we're going to have the ability to deliver large amounts of payload to the Martian surface, and potentially before we're actually putting all of the really critical hardware for human missions to Mars on that, we may do some test flights of those systems. And in doing those, we then have the bandwidth to carry other payloads down that could be used for those demonstrators. So between the various objectives that are in the Planetary Science Decadal Survey for Mars and various technologies that need to be demonstrated for future human exploration, we're curious to see what opportunities you think could best fit in the that landed capacity of mass going to Mars.
Thanks. And that mystery voice is Chris Jones. Hi, Chris.
Hey, Tori.
Our next question in this theme, how important is it for us to follow NASA's Moon to Mars Architecture Definition Document, EDD, when determining our mission concept?
So I will say there's not anything in there that is an explicit requirement for how your concept needs to work, but it's a very good reference to understand what are the kinds of things that NASA wants to do on the way to and going to Mars, and what are some of those things that are going to need to be demonstrated in order to actually achieve an eventual architecture that does that. So we do recommend that you consult it to tie into the relevance of what NASA is going to care about and make sure that you're addressing those goals and objectives. But again, there's also other places to pull ideas from of things to attempt to do. I definitely point folks to the Planetary Science Decadal Survey and also STMD's recent list of technology shortfall areas as other things of interest.
And I will point out for everybody who's following along in the summary document, we have linked important documents that are mentioned in each question in each of those questions. So if you're not sure what the ADD is, you can click on that link and it'll take you straight to it. And our next question, are we restricted to designing a single precursor mission, or can our concept account for multiple Earth-Mars missions as steps of a larger precursor campaign?
So we're open to hearing about it if you'd like to propose a multi-mission campaign there. But in that case, you do need to also address how the individual missions each address certain objectives and how they would influence each other. So if you have either problems with an early mission, how does that maybe delay or otherwise impact a later mission? Or alternatively, if you have some unexpected finding or success on an earlier mission, would that then adjust the way your campaign would proceed?
All right, next question. Should we assume NASA would deem Starship safe for the first human landing on Mars, or should we look into testing alternate human landing systems?
So here, think about what would lead NASA to decide if a given landing system, whether it was Starship or something else, is sufficiently safe for humans to use to get down to the surface of Mars. And indeed, testing that capability and doing things along with that is probably quite relevant to what we'd like to see for this theme.
All right, and our next question. Do we need to fit into one launch, or can we distribute among multiple vehicles?
So we'll say that depending on your choice of your launch vehicle and the concept of operations of what you're doing, we're not putting an explicit restriction on it. You might want to use multiple launches to do it. Again, the focus on the theme here is less on the transportation architecture to get to Mars and more what are those demonstrations that you can do if you have the ability to put tens of metric tons of payload on the Martian surface, agnostic to at least most of the details of what the system is that gets you to there.
And this is the last question in this theme. Can we assume that the SLA phase of lunar exploration is active and that any planned technologies to retire shortfalls will have been implemented?
So, yes, you can assume that we're in sustained lunar evolution by this point. But then, with respect to being able to retire specific shortfalls, make sure to identify what are those needed technologies and what your estimate of the likelihood is that those technologies are retiring those shortfalls. And in addition, especially for those that you're counting on to get resolved, say, right before you're going to actually fly your particular mission, think about what alternatives might be available in case those shortfalls aren't retired. That's an important thing that we look for in other kinds of mission proposals to NASA is what's your alternative if some key technology development that you're relying on doesn't come through?
And that concludes this category. We're going to move on to technical questions in the small lunar servicing and maintenance robot category or theme. And this was the theme that we received the most questions in. So we will start with the first one. Do we need to describe in detail how the rover should get to the moon? Are we responsible for designing the lunar module that will be getting the lunar rover to the moon?
So no, we're not looking for a design of a transportation system or a landing system here. We're focused on the rover or the robot, whatever your form factor your system takes. So you don't need to design the delivery system, but if your system is going to impose some pretty significant requirement on that, if you're hoping that you're going to need a crane to offload you from something, then you should at least identify, hey, you're going to need some help getting down onto the lunar surface, but you don't need to then go design the entire system that does that.
Question 17. Are teams allowed to create their own specifications for robot tasks based on the examples given in the third paragraph of the guidelines, or should every task be addressed as written?
So Dan and I kind of batched this question in response with a few of the others that came in, all kind of asking about how do we decide what our rover or robot should be able to do? And what we're trying to do with this theme is to give you, the teams, some flexibility to define your own specifications and your own requirements here. We've listed a number of examples in the description of the theme, and that's by no means an exhaustive list of things that would be interesting to be able to do. But we're not trying to ask for doing all of those, and we're not even trying to say it can only be from that set of things. Instead, we want you to identify things that would be useful that you think a servicing robot in the 500 kilogram constraint could provide. And keep in mind that the judges are going to kind of evaluate one of the main trade-offs that exists in RASC-AL, which is how innovative and flexible and capable your concept is. How cool is it? Versus how realistic and how good is your technical engineering, the defining of your specifications and your system there. Because we're looking for concepts that do both. We want new and interesting ideas, and if they can address a wide variety of potential functions, that would be wonderful. But you do also need to bring us a credible design in that 500 kilograms with realistic technology and realistic budget there, or otherwise it might be just a little too futuristic to be credible.
And we have a couple of miscellaneous questions on that as well. 26, what is the budget for the maintenance robot, or how can we go about estimating a budget?
So we're going to ask y'all to do some cost estimating, and I know every year this is a bit of a challenge because a lot of the cost estimating tools that sometimes get used in other places aren't necessarily very easy to access as university teams. So a couple of the resources that we want to point you to, there is a cost estimating handbook that NASA has published and updates from time to time. And there's a couple of papers that are scattered about on the NIA website that also have some cost estimating resources for different kinds of systems that could be helpful. And I've got a couple of those links handy, and I will send those over to you, Tori. Looking at it, One of them is in the recommended reading for RASC-AL, and another is in the recommended reading for one of the other NIA challenges, but they're both, I think, relevant to folks working on this theme, and indeed folks working on all 3 themes. So I'll send those links to you, Tori, as soon as we're done here, and we can kind of put a particular highlight around those for folks in the themes this year.
Well, thanks, Chris. And Jen and I will also add those links to the Q&A session summary doc. So if you're listening to this in the future, you'll be able to find them there. The next question is 27. What timeline is involved in developing, testing, and implementing a maintenance robot? Or how do we go about estimating a timeline?
So estimating a timeline is another challenge that comes with formulating a concept and then starting to think about what would that look like as not just a concept, but a project to develop and build and fly said concept as a real system. So there, I'd recommend getting familiar with the NASA Systems Engineering Handbook. One of the things that is an important part of systems engineering is starting to understand how you would lay out a project timeline. In addition, NASA has put out other resources in the world of project management that can also help give you insight there. I'll say we're not going to be looking for the same level of detail that those handbooks typically, guide actual formal NASA projects to do. Those projects typically have, multiple people spending all of their time working on doing that kind of work. I'm expecting that for the teams here, you wouldn't have quite that time available. But it could give you some good guidance of things to think about and point you to some key concepts to get at in thinking about what it takes to go from initial concept formulation all the way to a piece of hardware that's ready for flight, and thus to give you a sense of what kind of timeline that looks like.
Question 32. Could you provide further clarity on how detailed our concept needs to be when addressing the required capabilities like autonomous operation and teleoperation?
So yes, I am going to kind of weasel out of answering the question and give you, the teams, the freedom to decide what that level is. But here's the guidance I will give you is recall that at the end of the day, you're going to get a 15-page final paper and about a 30-ish or so minute final presentation to the judges to communicate the entirety of your concept. And again, in RASC-AL, we're looking at that tension between those 2 key things of, is the concept innovative? And are you actually showing us what is genuinely innovative about it? And is the concept credible? Have you done some good, solid engineering to determine that this innovative or revolutionary concept could actually come to exist? So for things like autonomous operation and teleoperation, you certainly need to address that those are going to exist. And I would say, what are the key things that you're either doing in an innovative fashion, or what are the key things that you're leveraging existing or very near-term technologies to make your concept happen, and be able to at least give us the sense that you know what you're talking about and you've done the real research to figure out how that works, and you're not just hand-waving it away.
Thank you. And question 36. What GPS/radio/navigation systems can we assume are available on the moon by the point this robot would be functional? What are the communication requirements for the rover, both in terms of range and bandwidth?
So let me take that second question first and say, in the spirit of some of the other answers like to 17 that we did, we do want you to define what your capabilities are, and then that will in turn determine how effective your robot can be. To get some guidance of some of the things we're envisioning more broadly for the moon, the architecture definition document does have some material on, I think, particular communications bands and at least possible ways that a communications architecture for the lunar South Pole could be set up. One thing that Dan and I wanted to point out is the architecture definition document is a living document that NASA updates yearly. The hope is that the next update will come out early next year, probably on a timeline where it will become available shortly before proposals are due. So we're not expecting that you're going to incorporate any new updates that roll out right before then. So therefore, if you happen to pull something from that, that's great. Please note which version of the document you use when you're referencing it so that we on the judging committee can understand, they're using last year's document or they're using this year's document, so that we're not accidentally getting confused about where you're pulling your information from.
All right, question.
And just to note, just real quick to note that there will be, when that new document gets released, there will be log of the things that have changed, so that the teams can look over it without having to go through, line by line, the whole updated document.
And we can also make sure on our end from NASA to let Tori and Jen know that it has been updated so they can in turn pass that information on to the teams.
Yep.
Thank you, guys. That'll be very helpful. Question 39. Does the weight limit of the 500 kilograms include all package components, or can additional weights be added, such as a charger? Do spare parts for maintenance count toward the 500 kilogram requirement?
So anything on your system that you couldn't reasonably assume would already have been deployed for some other purpose, that is going to count against your 500 kilogram limit. So as an example, you can assume that there is a power system somewhere on the moon that has interfaces for interacting with payloads, but whatever you need on your side of the system to then interface with that, that is going to have to fit within your 500 kilograms. Likewise, for example, probably some very basic and universal spares might be available elsewhere, but probably for any specialized components you've got, the spare parts you want to carry are going to need to fit within that 500 kilograms. So you may have to make the trade-off of carrying more spares and having a longer lifetime, but then having less mass available for the actual functions and capabilities aboard your robot.
All right. And question 42. What is the lunar infrastructure LI level when we arrive?
So honestly, that's still kind of an open question for NASA. We're still working on defining exactly what specific infrastructure we will have in place on the moon. But the architecture definition document does help describe the functions that we're planning to eventually have elements able to meet at various points in the deployment of systems to the moon. So it's not one explicit target for you to aim for, but the ADD can at least give you some guidance of the kinds of things we're planning to develop and have available over time.
And we have the very last question in this theme, and for the technical questions received in advance. Can we assume if there is additional infrastructure to support our repair rover's needs?
So similar to what I answered a couple of questions ago, in terms of other things that likely exist on the surface at this point, yes, but make sure you're describing what things you are assuming the existence of. Because one of the things that on the judging side we would then evaluate on is if you're assuming the existence of something that's very specialized to supporting your rover, that's probably unlikely to have necessarily come down independently of your own system there. But if all you're assuming is, oh, that same power system that you're going to hook up to, there are spare parts on the interface between the power system and your rover, and you're planning to use a common power interface too, okay, that's something that you could probably assume does in fact exist elsewhere.
Thank you very much, Chris and Dan, for all of your technical responses. We're going to move on now to the miscellaneous questions, and some of these are a little bit technical and some of them are more programmatic, but Jen is going to read them and I will provide the answers.
So our first question under miscellaneous questions, is there a minimum size required for each team?
Thank you. And this question gets asked every year in different ways. So I'm going to be kind of listing out the requirements for each team. And these requirements are listed in the competition guidelines document under eligibility. So at a minimum, teams must contain one faculty or industry advisor with a university or college affiliation at a US-based institution, and 2 students from that US-based university or college who work on the project and present at the RASC-AL competition forum. So altogether, you need one, it can be either a faculty member at your lead university, or you can be an industry advisor with a university or college affiliation. So that means you would be primarily maybe in industry, but you teach classes at the university. And then 2 students who then attend the RASC-AL forum from your lead institution. So those minimum requirements that I just listed must be met by the US-based university or universities if you're partnering with another US-based university. If a U.S. university is partnered with a foreign university, team members or advisors from that foreign university do not count toward the requirements. So those are just extra team members. We know that they're important and integral to your team's functioning, but for our minimum requirements, they are not eligible as meeting those requirements. And if you've got any other questions about eligibility, feel free to send us a question. We get questions to, does my advisor need to attend the forum? No, but it's strongly recommended. All you really truly need are those 2 students, but we do find that teams who send an appropriate number of students tend to do better. They give better presentations, they give better poster sessions, and they've got more opportunities to network and interact with not just our NASA judges and our industry judges and sponsors, but also with the other teams. So we really encourage you to add on team members if you find you're lacking in any specialty on your team and bring them with you to the forum.
Perfect. Next question. Throughout the competitive years of RASC-AL, what are things that teams did that caught your attention?
So I think Chris actually answered this question, or maybe Dan. But teams should excel, and I think he's already even said this. They need to excel in one or both of coming up with a genuinely innovative approach that hasn't been previously published in research, and or doing incredible integrated design and analysis of a concept that is novel. So don't just reinvent an existing system, but what it says here is credible integrated design and analysis of that system. So RASC-AL is really focused on out-of-the-box thinking, revolutionary concepts, innovation, and you can see that those are prioritized in the scoring matrix as well.
Thank you, Tori. And the last question in under miscellaneous questions, what are the common implementation challenges faced by past RASC-AL participants, and how can we proactively address these in our project design?
So I'm going to approach this from the other end, and I'm going to tell you what successful teams do well, because we're asked every year, you know, how do I make sure that I'm a RASC-AL finalist, right? And if you accomplish these things, then you could be successful, right? So you should involve your advisors early and often so that they can guide you to additional resources. For example, maybe they know other subject matter experts in the field, or maybe they have access to labs or research databases that you don't have access to. Advisors can also provide valuable input on your research or on your methods, but only if you give them enough time to actually review your work before the proposal deadline. And if your team has trouble in any specific area, you can always add a team member at any point in time with expertise in that area. And if you keep them and everyone on the project engaged throughout your project, then you'll have higher chances of success. You can also make sure that your proposed concept actually addresses your RASC-AL theme, because every year we get a couple of concepts that don't address the theme, but kind of just acknowledge it and then propose their own separate concept. So make sure your concept actually addresses the theme, and then also make sure that it does so in a novel way. And once you've nailed your concept down, you make sure that it meets those 2 requirements. Do some straight trade studies to try to make sure you're not overlooking alternatives that may be more efficient, cheaper, lighter, safer, anything, right? And finally, be prepared to tell the judges why you've made those choices and why your solution is optimal or innovative. So if you choose an untraditional approach, the very first thing that the judges are going to ask you is, why did you pick that? And if you don't explain why, then they're not going to understand the innovation that's there. Everything there takes a lot of time. So successful teams start early, meet often, and set goals that they meet on a regular basis. And some very common issues that teams encounter include flawed or incorrect engineering, providing commonplace solutions in areas where innovation is expected, or poor project management. And I will give Chris and Dan a moment if you wanted to add anything else that I haven't included here.
I think you've done a pretty good job covering it. Again, it's the balance between that innovation and the credibility that Chris talked about earlier. We want innovative, revolutionary ideas. Again, a lot of times it can be previous ideas and how they're pulled together and synergized or integrated. So, don't think you have to think of this pie in the sky, never thought of before, because in reality, probably most things have been thought of and you can find some reference to it, but we want credible, innovative approaches.
And I'll add from things I've heard talking to teams over the years that one of the challenges that can pop up on you is that, people who have key roles on the team, maybe they get busy or their schedule shifts on them, or for some reason they're not able to continue participating at the level that they had been. Sometimes those are for very good reasons. Sometimes it's because somebody frankly decides they don't want to do this anymore. So to that end, make sure that you've got a good plan for communicating what everybody on the team is doing and documenting that well, so that if there was a sudden change and somebody else had to take over a role, they're not starting from scratch. And that's a skill that'll be very helpful here in managing your project to RASC-AL. It'll also serve you well in any number of other things down the road, as you get into your career. That good documentation and that good ability to leave records behind that other folks can follow will make a lot of your life easier as you go forward.
Thank you, gentlemen.
So that
All right.
wraps up,
Go
our
ahead, Jen.
miscellaneous questions. Now we'll move into the programmatic. So our first programmatic question for Tori is, can we submit supporting materials, for example, additional code, detailed simulation data, or visual models with the technical paper? If allowed, are there specific formats or guidelines for submitting these additional materials?
So I want to preface this question with, we had a discussion with Dan about this, and Dan had a discussion with Chris before us. And we are going to add an option on the chart deck and poster submission form, which is the very last submission that teams submit right before the forum. I think it happens 2 or 3 days before the forum. We will allow you to submit additional supporting documents for your prototype only, but we want to be very clear that there are some strict, Jen, can you take a peek and make sure everybody's muted?
Got
Thank
it.
you. We want to be clear that there are some very specific guidelines, and we really want you to color within the lines here. So optional documents are not required and they're not necessary to earn full bonus prototype points. The thing that you will be judged on is what you bring and present at the forum. So these optional documents, maybe they're graphics, maybe they're videos. If for some reason your prototype gets caught up and you're not able to actually present it at the forum, you're not going to be able to earn those points. So you actually do have to present your prototype at some way, right? So there's another question in here about what counts as a prototype: virtual simulations of your prototype, or specific videos of all of the full-size prototyping work that you've done. That could count, right? But for example, just submitting code and documentation, that is not a prototype. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't demonstrate anything. It's just the code and documentation for what you would demonstrate. Second, the judges are not obligated to view or review these items, so they might just choose not to look at them. And if a judge chooses to view these items, they may only contribute to your prototype bonus point score. So don't try to submit anything here that you think is going to make up for anything that you've already submitted in your technical paper, which would have occurred about 2 weeks prior to this. It's not going to help that part of your score. The only thing that it can help with is your prototype's bonus points. We had a note, items submitted this way, you can consider them like an appendix for your prototype. There's no preference in documentation, but they must be well documented, and the judges are not obligated to review or view them. Again, we've got some notes down here about what is and isn't a prototype, and it must be demonstrated. the same prototype standards apply. We're just giving you a little bit of an extra option if you want to display something extra that you think will help clarify your prototype.
Perfect. Next question. What are some things that most teams fail to do well in the technical report?
So we've covered this in some of the other questions. I'll just point you to the RASC-AL archive so you can read a couple of the winning team's technical papers and see what they do really well. And then try to do that in the way that you organize your paper and the way that you write your paper. But some common pitfalls I'll say are spelling and grammar, overuse of the appendix, and graphics with text size that is way too small. So remember, your best written paper cannot make up for a poor concept. So make sure you do all your research and all your testing first, and then put that into your paper.
Question 7. Should the prototype be demonstrated live during the final presentation, or is it acceptable to pre-record simulation outputs? For example, video walkthroughs of our virtual simulations for use in the presentation.
All right, so either is acceptable, but prototypes should be demonstrated somehow during both the presentation and the poster session. So high quality prototypes demonstrated physically in person can have really high impact, but so can high quality videos of testing that's not possible to demonstrate in person. For example, if you've got some great testing and it's in your lab and it's in like a specialized environment and you're not able to bring that environment with you, you may just bring part of what you tested and then show videos of the testing that you did. That would be perfectly acceptable. Your choice is just going to depend on what you build, what you want to show, and the feasibility of bringing it to demonstrate at the forum.
And our last question that was submitted in advance. Are we allowed to ask more questions to clarify something in the future? If we have additional questions or need clarification down the line, would it be possible to reach out via email, or are there any interim meetings scheduled for feedback or check-ins during the competition timeline?
So the great thing about this question is it gets asked every year, and I like to put it at the end because this is the end of the questions we answer in advance. So yes, we will be taking additional and follow-up questions right after this. But if you have more questions that occur to you after the Q&A, please feel free to email us at rascal@ninet.org. Questions received via email will be posted to the RASC-AL FAQs webpage, not in the Q&A summary document. So go ahead and check that webpage frequently. The only items that will appear in the Q&A summary document are questions associated with the Q&A. There are no other Q&A sessions planned, but all proposals receive verbatim feedback from our judges on their submissions once the selection notifications are sent out. So feedback received this way, we'll just put out a quick warning here. It may be duplicative or contradictory in nature, as the comments come directly from our experienced but diverse panel of judges. They don't always agree, so their comments might not always agree with each other. And just checking. Oh, one thing I will say, if you want to submit questions, make sure that if you need an answer, you submit it at least a week prior to the proposal deadline. We're not going to be able to do a really quick turnaround for you within a day on a weekend. Just, we're not going to be working. Same thing with holiday. We've got a lot of holidays coming up, and we give government holidays, so none of us will be working on those holidays, but we're happy to answer those questions for you at any other point in time. Just email them to us and we'll send them off to either Dan and Chris for technical questions, or we will be able to reply to them if they're programmatic in nature. All right, and this is the point in time where we can take any additional questions. We already have one person raising their hand, and I love that. Dan and Chris, before we get started, is there anything else that you wanted to add? No?
No, not for me. How about you, Chris?
Nope. Let's take some questions.
All right. I see a raised hand from Kiowa. Is that right?
Hey, it's Kiowa.
Kiowa.
Hi. So thanks for the Q&A, everybody. So my question is that there seems to be this like emphasis on, profitability, economic analysis, sort of like a you're an entrepreneur, what are you offering us? My question is, do we have to act like private entrepreneurs trying to sell stuff to NASA, or can we create a design for NASA to implement and for them to profit off of? Like for example, what I mean is, if you design propellant, like one of the speakers earlier mentioned, what will you charge for propellant on the moon? My question is asking, what if we make a design so that NASA could be the one charging for propellant on the moon? Is that something that we can do, or is that like too out of the theme?
That's a good programmatic question. Typically, because we're a government agency, we don't sell anything. We can utilize. So, my first would be no, we can't sell anything because we're a taxpayer funded government agency. But I've actually never had that question asked directly. So without getting legal involved or something like that, I would shy away from that. But how you can use that to support industry as well as support NASA's goals in the Artemis program and the Moon to Mars initiative are fair game. And in essence, you're coming up with a price point that would be attractive as a service or a commodity to NASA, and that would also allow economic growth and sustainability on the lunar surface. Chris, do you agree? Any comments?
I think you covered it pretty well there, Dan. Just one of the things that has shifted in the way that NASA is procuring the different things it needs to do lunar exploration and Mars exploration now versus where it has historically been is going to more of a services oriented approach. So part of what we're thinking about for the framing of that first theme is, what would a potential service look like that met the demands that we talked about that are in that theme, with the recognition that the way that would get implemented years and years ago might be a little different than the way it would get implemented today. And I think we're thinking of it a little bit more in the terms of today, where that would be what kind of contract might NASA put out to get that level of production of regolith and of propellant and of metals. And so the analysis you're doing in your concept is almost something that would enable NASA to be a smart buyer and to be able to say, well, if somebody offered to do it at this price point, or if we put out a contract at this price point, then that's something that we think is both realistic, but also would fit within the budget of what NASA's looking to do.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Chris. And before we continue, I do want to mention that all of the questions we receive right now, the additional and follow-up questions, we're going to go ahead and take those as well as Dan and Chris's responses. Those are going to be cleaned up a little bit, approved by them, and then reposted in that same link to the same Q&A session summary document after the call. So if you have you want to go back and take a look at the live on-call questions and their responses, the cleaned up versions, they'll be there within about a week after this call. We have another raised hand from Oscar right before you have to leave to teach, right? Oh, Oscar, you may want to unmute yourself. No? What about Daniel Culp?
Hey, how's it going? I had a quick question on SLE slide 21. I just see a bit of a mismatch between the amount of demand of regolith and water ice process in the fuel with only assuming 100 kilowatts of power. It seems like we're going to need a couple megawatts based on, the propellant production architecture papers to get that yearly demand. So I was just curious there. It seems like we need more power.
Jen,
Yeah.
can you navigate us to question 21?
Yeah, I've seen some differing power requirements to generate those type of levels. I don't know if Chris, if you want to chime in on this and the ISRU work that you've done. But it depends on the rate of production. And again, we're specifying at least 100 kilowatts of electric power that's available. And again, getting up to 100 tons with that 100 kilowatts, I have seen some designs for that, but I agree with Daniel's assessment that that may not be enough to generate that full 100 tons of for example propellant. But again, these aren't exact numbers, so we're trying to kind of leave things open for the teams to innovate and see how what they can achieve.
And I'll also build on it and say that, yeah, I mean, I agree from some of the analysis I've done. Yeah, to get to things like 100 tons of propellant per year, you're almost certainly going to need more than 100 kilowatts of power. The 100 kilowatts kind of comes sort of free of charge in that that's what we're kind of ground ruling in as already existing in the lunar infrastructure. But as part of your system that would then meet that, that propellant demand, you might need to deploy additional power systems to it. And so your analysis can point to, you know, does that then mean you actually need to deploy those couple of megawatts worth of power in order to meet that demand? And, if so, do you then still have some use for tapping into the existing 100 kilowatts, or are you providing sufficient power that it's not there? We're basically saying you get the 100 kilowatts free of charge because of the nature of what we expect to be on the moon at that point, but fully recognize that probably to achieve these demand rates, you would also have to bring a power system of your own that can make up the difference.
Okay, perfect. Thanks for that clarification. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
The next question that we'll go to is from Oscar Marcelo Suarez. The question is, can a team switch mentors at any point or at some point? Yes, absolutely. Go ahead and just send us a message CCing both your current advisor and the other advisor as well as the team lead. You may want to reference your NOI reference number and we can go ahead and get that switched over for you. We do have, I think, a different Oscar with their hand raised that we tried to call on before. Oscar, is your unmute function working now?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I guess it is. Well, howdy. So I have a question about the balance between verification of technology based on like other resources and our own engineering analysis. So if technologies have been proven in like other technical papers or other works of NASA, but we want to implement it in maybe a slightly different way in our concepts, what level of reliance can we have upon those past works, and how much future analysis do we need to do? Like where do we hit to strike that balance?
I would probably say that, again, if you're utilizing a technology that's been, that's at for example, a technology readiness level of 9 that's been implemented and it's fully functional, then you can assume that that's available. You to figure out the cost of that capability, that technology in your element design and your architecture. If you're changing it or if you're using it and doing some derivative, you really need to outline what is needed from a Delta technology development effort, and what is the credibility of doing those changes to the technology and having it ready in time, and what is potentially the cost and the time frame that is needed, and how does that fit with your concept? Does that make sense? Chris, do you have anything else you want to add from past competitions of?
No, nothing I'll add there. I think you covered it, Dan.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to take a question from the chat from Ishmael Magana. Where can we find winning proposal papers from previous years? We do not publish proposal papers from any of our teams. However, if you do want to find some past winning technical papers, you can take a peek at the RASC-AL website, go on down to the RASC-AL archives, and I'm going to go ahead and, Jen, I'm going to share my screen for a moment, just so you know what's going on. All right, here, this is the RASC-AL website. If you click right here in the archives, you can see our by year section. We're currently updating that. Jen is going to get this a little bit more tidy. If you want to look by past themes, you can click on past themes and it will show you all of the themes back through 2011. So you can search papers by theme. And then if you want to see past winners and technical reports, they're here. We also find that you might think this is helpful. You can view all previous live stream presentations by just clicking this button right here. And it'll take you to our Vimeo page where you can watch past presentations. So if you're curious about a concept and exactly how they presented it, you can take a look here. We've got years worth of content that you can review. Thank you, Ishmael. I'm going to mark you as checked. All right, we have another question here from Landon Hendrickson. When looking at addressing technology shortfalls, NASA's shortfall document splits off shortfall rankings pertinent to different stakeholder groups, such as large industry, small industry, NASA Exploration Systems, ESCMD, NASA SMD, etc. For the Mars Human Precursor mission, is there a priority to any stakeholder group when looking at addressing these shortfalls? Or is it up to our discretion which stakeholder shortfall list we prioritize?
Chris, do you want to input, or you want me to take
Sure,
it?
I can take a start at that, which is at the end of the day, the themes and what we're doing for RASC-AL do primarily focus on the support for human exploration. So the rankings as identified by the Exploration Systems Development Mission Directorate, ESDMD, those are probably the most relevant for the sake of what is kind of encapsulated in the RASC-AL theme. But the fact of the matter is we're also interested in things that, could then be valuable to the Science Mission Directorate, that could be valuable to those other stakeholders. So I wouldn't discard the priorities from those other groups there in making your decision, but probably give a little extra weighting to the ones from ESDMD. Dan, does that make sense?
Yeah, again, it's, part of this was to understand, what new classes of science and technology demonstrations that could be accomplished with these larger payload masses to the Mars surface. So I think Chris has pretty much covered it. And again, this is as a precursor for human missions, but the teams are welcome to prioritize, or at their discretion, identify critical areas in science and technology that are enabled here. So, for example, if you've got the capability in a demonstration to identify the most likely places where life might exist on Mars with a scientific, capability, that can help prioritize where the humans might land and set up operations on the Martian surface. So there's a lot of synergy between them. But I think Chris is right in terms of assisting with the human aspect of Mars exploration has a little bit more weight, but it's up to the teams to provide a compelling argument as to where the benefit is.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Dan. As a reminder, if you've got questions, go ahead and pop them into the chat or raise your hand to add yourself to the queue. We'll go ahead and take people in the order that they are in the queue. The very next question that we have, however, is from Mandar. Hi, thank you for the great Q&A session. For a Human Mars Precursor campaign, how do we determine the TRL of the technologies we plan to include? And what justifications are necessary for our assessments? We will say we do have a lot of TRL information available in the resources. Anything else from your perspective, Dan or Chris?
Yeah, I think it's up to the teams to use the resource that are available on the RASC-AL site and on the NASA site to determine that TRL level.
One classic rule of thumb is generally by the time you are ready to move into development of your integrated engineering system, you'd like all of your technologies to have reached TRL 6. So as you're going through and thinking about the development timeline of your overall system and when you would need certain technologies to then be ready to infuse, that's a common rule that NASA uses in the course of its developments, is you need to be at TRL 6 by what's called PDR, the preliminary design review, in order to then move into to be considered, kind of on a good trajectory of having that technology ready to implement in your larger integrated system.
All right, thank you. Next, we have a raised hand from Gabe Epstein. Gabe?
Hi, sorry, my question was somewhat addressed, but I was just going to ask about currently lower TRL levels and any guidelines you might have in estimating future TRL levels.
That's really a tough thing because it depends on how much funding and what exactly what lower TRL you're at. We have this kind of this valley of death where a lot of technologies they progress through the TRL system, but then they just don't get the funding, and there's implementation aspects that keep it from progressing. So that's why Chris said, when you get to TRL 6, you're talking about some system or subsystem that's been tested in a relevant environment, either in space or on the ground, that really says that this technology is very near implementation. So there's not really great guidance. I'll see if Chris has some other thoughts, but it just introduces, as you get to a lower TRL level, the uncertainty of that technology being able to be available when you need it to be implemented.
Yeah, honestly, it's a challenge we have even here in NASA, is proper forecasting of how long and what kind of resources it's going to take to mature a technology, especially through that valley of death, getting it from the low TRLs towards the mid TRLs. So unfortunately, there's not really a good methodology I'm familiar with to point everybody to. I do like the point Dan's making of, given that there's going to be uncertainty around it, see if you can figure out ways to bring that into your analysis. If you can say, okay, we don't know if this is, how long it's going to take to get from where this technology is today to where we need it to be. But if we can even come up with some somewhat credible bounds for that and sort of see, well, what does the best case scenario and the worst case scenario look like, then at least you're doing two good things there. One, you're acknowledging the uncertainty around that and factoring it into your analysis, which is something that is always a good thing to bring in. Don't be just deterministic about everything, but factor in uncertainty. And then two, you're at least trying, you're giving yourself some bounds to work in that you can hope to be in. It's kind of moving the problem from just what is the way to do it to how do you then estimate that uncertainty. But at least there you can, try and go off of things you're able to pick up on from reading about that technology and seeing where it's gone so far and where it's going, and at least be able to say, well, maybe if it's going to stick with the trajectory it's on now, we might think it's this many more years. But if things go well, maybe it could be somewhat faster than that. If things go poorly, it might take longer.
So for some of our other NIA competitions, we've had a lot of questions about TRLs, and I've got a very not serious image I'm going to put up on the screen while I remind you all to raise your hand or ask any additional questions down here in the chat if you've got other questions. This was provided by one of our other NASA judges. It's the NASA TRL unicorn chart. And if you're very new to TRLs, this might help put things into a little bit of a perspective, but also it's kind of fun. So this is, again, not an official resource, but if you have other questions, feel free to use the raise hand function, or thank you, Liam. Go ahead and pop your questions down here into the chat. I think I put this in the email, but if we do run out of questions, we will go ahead and end the Q&A session early. You can always email us at rascal@nianet.org if you do have additional questions. But we do have a question here from Kiowa Wells. Kiowa?
Hey, so this is kind of a follow-up to my other question that maybe is a different angle. Does NASA have a preference between, like, you know, spending more money for a product that's ready on the moon? Like, let's say, okay, some company has developed this lunar base and they make propellant, yada yada, and it's more expensive, right? That as opposed to just being given a plan where they can implement it for a little bit cheaper, but they would have to take some of the upfront risks. You know what I mean? Like, they would have to use NASA resources, NASA astronauts, but then, you know, they would spend a lot less on their implementation of their Moon to Mars architecture and so on. So 2 scenarios, which one do they prefer, I guess?
That's tough to answer, because it kind of depends. You know, it depends on how it fits in with what you're proposing, and then what are the other benefits to NASA. I don't really have a good answer for that. Chris, do you have any thoughts?
No, it's a tough one because I feel like, depending on the particulars of the scenario, NASA would go one way or the other. And I'm trying to think if there's something I'd feel comfortable generalizing to answer that, and I'm not sure that there is, for that one at least. Maybe if when, you know, by the time the full fleshed out Q&A document gets posted in a few days, if Dan or I comes up with a more clever answer or feels like we could make a judgment there, we can add to it. But yeah, right now I'm going to have to punt on having a good answer for that one.
There's no issue in deferring.
Okay, thanks, guys.
All right, we can take any additional questions if you want to use the raise hand function or add your question down in the chat. Now is the time. So while you all are thinking of any additional questions or typing them into the chat, Jen, do you want to go ahead and go to the next slide for me? So in the meantime, I want to go ahead and use this time to cover some of our upcoming dates. You can see on this slide, we've got things listed out in different colors. Proposers, which is everybody here, thank you so much for submitting an NOI and pulling a team together. We really appreciate that. So you all are part of our proposers category currently. February 24th, 2025 is the deadline to submit proposals and videos. If you are not sure about what those requirements are, we invite you to take a look at the RASC-AL competition guidelines document for 2025. It's all over our website. We will send out notification of selection status. So either you are a non-selected team or a finalist on March 20th, 2025. Then our finalist teams get down into this next bracket in light blue. April 24th will be the deadline to register for the forum and pay for the forum. So last year, Jen, do you remember what our forum registration fee was? $410.
Somewhere around there, I believe.
So between March 20th and April 24th, teams will receive a $6,500 stipend meant to facilitate your participation in the forum. There are some fees associated with the forum, which is just the forum registration fee that covers all of your food and beverage during the entire forum. So that is almost entirely what that goes to cover, plus t-shirts. NI does not make a profit off of registration fees or anything. So just 100% of it goes to cover things you receive. But that will be the deadline for forum registration and payment. Then there is a deadline to submit your final technical paper on May 15th. We have the deadline to submit presentation and poster session files, which is May 29th. As a reminder to you, we will not be printing your poster. You need to have your poster printed, either have it printed elsewhere and shipped to the hotel, or plan to pick it up when you arrive in Florida or bring it with you. Whichever option best suits you, you still have to print your poster so that you can present it during the poster session. We just also require you to submit that digital file. This is also the point in time where if you have any additional supporting documents for your prototype, you can submit them on May 29th. Then the RASC-AL forum itself will be June 1st through 4th. That June 1st day is just like an arrival day, and we have a little networking session. And then the actual competition will be the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, with our award ceremony being sometime around 6 o'clock on the 4th. That is where we will announce our RASC-AL winners, which is our yellow category. If you are the 1st or 2nd place team in RASC-AL, we are currently setting up some presentation slots for AIAA Ascend in Las Vegas, Nevada. That will be July 22nd through 24th. So if you are selected as a winner, do realize that there's a very short turnaround time for your presentation, and you will need to have at least one person from your team register, travel to, and present at AIAA Ascend in Las Vegas, but you will receive an additional $6,500 stipend to do so. So you'll get a little bit of money to travel and present your work, and it'll be published by AIAA, which is very cool. That manuscript deadline, however, is a little bit close. I think it's June 22nd, something like that. So there's a very quick turnaround time. Basically, you'll just, take your technical paper, put any finishing touches on it, any comments that you may have gotten, and then submit it. All right, let's see. We've got 2 more questions here from Moksha. How many finalist teams will there be in total for all themes? Will there be more finalists for one theme over the other? Maybe. So our RASC-AL judges accept this year, it's up to 14 finalist teams. And we have had years where the judges review proposals and they decide that there aren't enough competitive proposals in one category. So they've cut up an entire theme. But usually I think it's not too lopsided. Usually there's a good amount of people in all of the themes to compete. So no, there's not a set number and one theme over the other. All of the themes are equally competitive. You're competing against all of the RASC-AL proposers for one of those 14 slots, not just within your theme. And then we've got another question from Serdar. Can international students at the lead U.S. institution participate in the forum if their team is selected as a finalist? Yes, that's a great question. And the answer is, if you are a foreign national attending a U.S.-based university, you are absolutely welcome to attend the on-site RASC-AL forum and continue participating with your team. The only thing that I will say is we have the majority of the forum at an off-site hotel. It's the Hilton Cocoa Beach Oceanfront, if you look it up. And all of our foreign national participants can attend all of the events held there. However, there is a NASA tour. So we have a bus take you out to NASA KSC, and we will organize that in the spring. But When we get all of your registration information, we'll be asking for certain information from our foreign nationals. We need that to submit to NASA to get you approval to attend the tour. So if you don't have that, then you may not be able to attend the tour. We will, however, try to arrange an alternate experience for you, which would probably be tickets to the KSC Visitor Center, which is very cool. And if you're not familiar with it, it's not a theme park, but it's like a theme park museum. So it's very cool. We've had some people confused about what that actual experience is at the visitor center. So it's very fun if you've never been before, and it's great. Other questions we have with the raise hand function, or any questions for the chat? Dan, I see you unmuted yourself. Do you have any comments that you would like to provide to our teams?
Was that to me, Tori? Did
Yeah.
you say Dan? Oh, okay. No, I just had my mic unmuted I forgot to mute it. So.
No, that's fine. You can stay unmuted if you want. You're in charge. So let me take a quick peek. All right, Jen, this is the end of our Q&A session then. We don't have any more questions. So Jen, if you want to go very briefly to the next slide. We want to thank everybody here for not just attending, but for also submitting a notice of intent to participate. If you haven't yet, but you were able to join us for the Q&A session, it's not too late. You invite your friends, invite anybody at another university that you know that's interested in participating. The NOI deadline has been extended through February 24th, which is the proposal deadline, and NOIs are not required and are non-binding. So if your ideas change between now and February, that's fine. You don't have to even tell us that your ideas have changed. All we want to know is the university. We want to know your university team lead, and we would like to, if you already know them, the contact information for your advisor. So this information, especially if you know which theme you're participating in, is extremely helpful for us for planning purposes to make sure that we have the right number of additional judges judging all of your submissions, right? So those 10 or 11 judges that you saw on our judges slide, we are eternally grateful to them for all the hard work that they put in. But Dan and Chris actually recruit close to 25 additional judges for our proposal review process. And by submitting an NOI, you help us find the right number and the right kind of proposal reviewers to make sure that you're getting the very best input. So again, thank you so much for submitting an NOI. It's not too late to submit additional NOIs if you've got more teams. And if you've got any other questions, Jen, if you want to go up 2 slides back to this one, thank you. If you've got any additional questions, please address them to the RASC-AL program team at RASC-AL@nianet.org. That'll reach both me and Jen. We're a small team, and we will forward your questions directly to Dan and Chris, if they're technical, or we will answer them ourselves if they are programmatic in nature. And about a week after the call, you'll be able to find that updated Q&A summary document, as well as this chart deck and a recording of the call at the below link. That's going to be rascal.nianet.org/FAQs. Again, thank you all so much for participating, and we look forward to hearing from you in February, if not sooner.
Yeah, thanks to everybody. Have a great evening, and looking forward to your proposals.
Thank you, Dan. And thank you so much. Big round of applause for Dan and Chris for answering all of your questions, like 100 questions plus. So thank you, gentlemen. Thank you so, so much.
Good luck, everybody, and looking forward to seeing those proposals.
Thank you. And goodbye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.